Welcome to the online class lecture of Professor S.K. Paul, HOD, University Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear scholars of PhD coursework, today I am going to discuss on literature on style and stylistics. So these two things would be discussed, style and stylistics. So let me begin. This essay reviews some literature on style and stylistics. It aims at giving an informative account of the subject matter, nature, objectives, approaches, and models of stylistics, as well as the relationship between this discipline and some other related areas of study. A style and stylistics. What are the theory and its practice? Simply defined as the study of a style, stylistics has a long history which has witnessed a number of various theories and practices due to the diversity of opinions regarding its subject matter, that is style, its aims and its scope. This lecture will shed light on the main issues in this area of investigation. What is a style? The best way to begin the discussion of stylistics is to define its subject matter, that is, a style. Style is elusive, style is ambiguous, style is confusing, etc., are very common ideas in introductory works on style, which indicate the different interpretations of the term. As, and so are very common ideas in introductory works on style, which indicate the different interpretations of the term by theorists and practitioners of linguistics, stylistics, and as far as literary style is concerned. Literary criticism. And as a thorough discussion of theories and approaches so far taken to a style requires too much space. This section highlights only some general remarks about the concept of a style. For more detailed and illustrative discussions may be cited in Invixed. Envikst, it's a proper noun, it's the name of a thinker. Invixed in 1973 suggests a number of principles as a basis for a taxonomy of definitions. These principles involve the relations between the speaker or writer and the text, in which case the personality and environment of the people. These principles involve the relations between the speaker or writer and the text, in which case the personality and environment of the people who have generated style provide the main clues to it. The relations between the text and the listener or reader, whereby the receiver's relations to textual stimuli are more readily accessible to study than are the generative impulses that motivated the sender of the message. A third group of investigations have tried to take an objective approach by eliminating references to the communicants at their end of the communication process. For them, clues to style are sought in the descriptions of the text, and not in appeals to personalities. This necessitates the use of objective methods of distinguish the stylistically significant feature of the text from the non-stylistic ones. Along another dimension, it has been suggested that all linguistic views of style tend to be based on one of three fundamentally different notions. First, style can be seen as a departure from a set of patterns labeled as a norm. According to the notion, stylistic analysis involves comparisons between features in the text whose style is analyzed and features in the body of the text defined as a norm and therefore serve as a relevant background. Secondly, style has been viewed as an addition of a certain stylistic features to a neutral, styleless, or pre-stylistic expression, style as ornamentation. Accordingly, a stylistic analysis becomes Accordingly, a stylistic analysis becomes a process of isolating and describing those added stylistic traits that stand out from the stylistically neutral or unmarked features. Thirdly, style has been viewed as connotation, in which case each linguistic feature in which case each linguistic feature acquires its stylistic significance from the textual and situational environment. Stylistic analysis, therefore, becomes a study of the relations between specific linguistic units and their environment. Commenting on the paper submitted to the symposium that took place in 1969 at the Villa Serbelloni and later published in a book under the title A Literary Style, a Symposium. Chapman, the editor, 1971, remarks: style is an ambiguous term. Among other things, it has been used to refer to the idiosyncratic manner of an individual or group, or to a small scale property of texts, or to a kind of extra or heightened expressiveness, or to a decorum based on social or cultural context, or to any one of a number of other concepts. Ullman in 1971, Ullman mentions that people have different views of a style. Some describe it as a matter of highly personal mode of vision. Others regard it as conscious or unconscious choices or deviation from a contextually related norm. The most neutral of all definitions for Ullman is the one which equates a style with expressiveness as distinct from cognitive meaning. There are definitions which view style in statistical terms. For instance, Bernard Bloch, cited in Saporta, 1960, proposes that the style of a Discourse is the message carried by the frequency distributions and transitional probabilities of its linguistic features, especially as they differ from those of the same features in the language as a whole. Thus, the analysis of a style essentially involves the identification and calibration of the various dimensions along which messages may differ. Along the same dimension, Invixt in 1964 defines the style of a text as the aggregate of the contextual probabilities of its linguistic items. He adds that aggregate implies that a style is the result of more than one linguistic item, and the style is built on observations made at various linguistics levels. Crystal and Davy in 1989 in sorry 19 um, 1969, not 89. Crystal and Davy in 1969 remark that the word style has a multiplicity of definitions of which they distinguish in their terms. For commonly occurring senses, the first sense of style refers to some or all of the language habits of one person, as when talking about Shakespeare's style or the style of James Joyce, or when discussing questions of disputed authorship. The features investigated are only those which are particularly unusual or original in a person's expression. In the second sense, a style is some or all of the language habits shared by a group of people at one time or over a period of time, as when referring to the style of the Augustan poets, the style of Old English heroic poetry, or styles of public speaking. Third, style can be used in an evaluative sense, judging the effectiveness of a mode of expression. A clear a clear or refined style is phrases used to make value judgments on the overall effect of the language on people. In contrast to the two senses mentioned above, this sense is in no way descriptive and objective. Finally, there is the sense of style, primarily associated with the literary language as a characteristic of good, effective, or beautiful writing. This sense is partially evaluative, partially descriptive, and the focus of the literary critic's attention alone. B. Biograndi and Dressler. D. Biograndi and Dressler in 1981 argue despite the diversity of approaches, there is a consensus that style results from the characteristic selection of options for producing a text or a set of texts. In other words, it refers to the choices a speaker or a writer makes from among the phonological, grammatical, and lexical resources of his language. Hartman and Stock in 1972. Leach and Short in 1981 distinguish three views of style. Dualism, which assumes a separation between form and meaning and is manifested in definitions of style as trace of thought and manner of expression. Monism, which assumes the inseparability of style and content, And finally, pluralism, which says language as a performing a number of different functions, and any piece of language is likely to be the result of choices made on different functional levels. Verdonk in 2002 defines a style as distinctive linguistic expression. More specifically, style for him is a matter of motivated choice among other possibilities. Wells in 2001 recognizes the difficulty of defining a style, which she describes to its various uses in several broad areas. She, however, lists some definitions. A style as the perceived distinctive manner of expression in writing or speaking. Style as variation in language use according to situation, medium, and degree of formality, and the set or sum of linguistic features that seem to be characteristic, whether of register, genre, or period. She also mentions the definitions of a style in terms of choice and deviation. Style, genre, and function. Todorov in 1971 defines genre as a norm consisting of a set of rules located at different levels. For example, the genre of journalism has its own rules, a selection or subcode taken from the language as a whole. One must be concise, mention the most important points first, avoid the lyric and personal, etc. Invixt in 1973 states that there is a very close relationship between style and genre, in that genre regarded as a culturally definable stable context category or stable cluster of contextual features usually correlates to some extent with a certain style, that is, with a certain type of language. However, as Verdonk in 2002 argues that there is not always a one-to-one correspondence between text type and style. This means that styles sometimes overlap, as it is the case in the advertisements. Invixt in 1973 also proposes a close connection between genre and function of language. Consequently, according to him, genre styles such as the styles of poetry, scientific communication, journalism, and colloquial conversation become functional styles. As for the function of literary text, especially poems, Verdonk in 2002 remarks, whatever the function of poetry may be, it bears no relation to our socially established needs and conventions, because he always unlike because um, he says, unlike non literary texts, poetry has no relevance to ordinary contexts of social life. To put it differently, poetry does not refer to our world directly, but provides a representation of it by means of its particular and conventional uses of language, which motivate readers to create an imaginary alternative world. For Verdonk, the essential function of literature may lie in its potential to enable us to satisfy our needs as individuals, to escape from our monotonous socialized existence. to feel reassured about the disorder and confusion in our minds, and to find a reflection of our conflicting emotions. In this way, the function of literature. In this way, um, the function of literature is not socializing but individualizing. Individualizing. Style, text, and context. Spencer and Gregory regard text as an utterance which is part of a complex social process, and therefore the personal, social, linguistic, literary, and ideological circumstances in which it was written need to be called upon from time to time. When serious examination of a literary text is being made recourse to factors such as these may be termed cultural contextualization. Some of the linguistic factors of this contextualizing process relate to placing the language of the text in terms of its diachronic period, diatopic, that is called dialect, diatopic and diatypic of field, mode, and tenor status and necessity for a linguist to have a historical dimension, even if the study is concerned solely with modern texts, because the creative writer lives in a literary and linguistic tradition and is often significantly conscious of it. According to Verdonk, in 2002, text is a stretch of language complete in itself and of some considerable extent, as for example, a business letter, a leaflet, a news report, a recipe, and so on. It is according to their use in particular contexts and not their length that texts are recognized as such. Thus, even single words or single sentences are texts in terms of their communicative meaning. Typical examples of such a small scale texts are public notices like keep off the grass, keep left, danger, ramp ahead, slow, and exit. The meaning of a text depends on its being actively employed in a context of use. This process of activation of a text by linking it to a context of use is called discourse. To put it differently, this contextualization of a text is actually the reader's or hearer's reconstruction of the writer's or speaker's intended intended message, that is his or her communication or his or her communicative act or discourse. Spencer and Gregory in 1964 argue that when examining a style, the analyst should not only focus on linguistic features in isolation but also consider their relation to other aspects of the text and its contextual setting. Otherwise, his final statements will be merely linguistic. In Fixed in 1973, regards contexts as determinants of a style. He remarks that styles have been defined as those variants of language that correlate with contexts and for relating variations of language and contexts. He suggests that this can be done in two ways. One can choose either to define sets of linguistic forms in terms of the context in which they occur, or to define contexts according to the linguistic forms that occur in them. Thus, one may study the language of an individual of a genre such as scientific communication of a period such as 18th century and so on, and compare this language with that of a relevant norm to pinpoint its own distinctive characteristics. Or one might, for instance, go through a corpus of contemporary English texts looking for the forms thou lovest and he loveth, and define all the passages dominated by these forms as archaic. Verdonk in 2002 maintains that conscious or unconscious choices of expression which create a particular style are always motivated, inspired, or induced by contextual circumstances in which both writers and readers, or speakers and listeners, are in various ways involved. Deriving a discourse from a text involves two different areas of meaning: the text's intrinsic linguistic or formal properties, its sounds, typography, vocabulary, grammar, and so on, and the extrinsic contextual factors which are believed to affect its linguistic meaning. These two interacting areas of meaning are the subject matter of two disciplines: semantics, which is the study of formal meanings as they are represented in the language of texts, that is, independent of writers, speaker, and readers, hearers; and pragmatics, which is concerned with meaning of language in discourse, that is, when it is used in an appropriate context to achieve particular aims. In principle, the process of discourse inferencing is the same of non-literary and literary texts. For in either case, there should be an interaction between the semantic meanings of the linguistic items of the text and their pragmatic meanings in a context of use. But the nature of literary discourse completely differs from that of non-literary discourse in that it is detached from the immediacy of social contact. Generally speaking, whereas the non-literary text is related to the context of our everyday social practice, the literary is not, it is self-enclosed. Literary discourses have meanings which are indefinite, undetermined, unstable, and indeed often unsettling. This gives rise to multiple meanings whenever a discourse is inferred from the same literary text. Such meanings cannot be pinned down and may therefore open up a refreshing perspective in addition to our socialized certainties. However, literary texts, uh, literary texts still bear some relation to the real world. Otherwise, we would not be able to derive some meaningful discourse from them. Style in some linguistic theories. In Wick's surveys the place of style in some linguistic theories, namely the traditional, structural, transformational, and functional grammar. He mentions that traditional grammar incorporated stylistic considerations. Many rules of old normative school grammars grammars, he remarks, were stylistic in nature. Such grammars recommended a selection of uses that was suitable for a definite set of situations and contexts. They were handbooks of approved linguistic manners and thus of style. In behaviorist structuralism, the study of style was mainly marginal rather than a central pursuit. The word style itself was absent from Bloomfield's language. However, many American structuralists spoke and wrote about style. Jellic Harris, for example, found the key to style in distribution. Moreover, as Fowler points out, Bloomfieldian structural linguistics offered a precisely terminology and framework for detailed analysis of metrical structure in poetry. As for European structuralism, Saucer was more interested in everyday speech than in written language, including literature, which he regarded as comparatively unimportant in the study of language as a whole. His pupil Charles Bailey, the founder of Stylistics, again gave little attention. However, some stylisticians made use of Saucer's dichotomy of langue and parole, attributing a style to parole rather than lang, Leach and Short in 1981. In addition, a version of European structuralism, formalism, showed a big concern with applying linguistics to the study of language in literature. This was clearly stated in a statement by one of its leading figures, Jacobson. The linguist whose field is any kind of language may and must include poetry in his study. A linguist deaf to the poetic function of language and a literary scholar indifferent to linguistic problems and unconversant with linguistic methods are equally flagrant anachronism. Among the functions of language, Jacobson recognizes the poetic function, which focuses on the message for its own sake. He asserts poetic function is not the sole function of verbal art, but only its dominant determining function, whereas in all other verbal activities it acts as a subsidiary accessory constituent. In transformational linguistics, the basic theory had no explicit treatment of a style. But this does not mean that transformational grammar is of no use to stylistics. Transformation grammar is a model which may give an account of the sequence of choices at one's disposal when he wishes to say something. Hello, 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 hello.